We're going to review ratios and proportions in this PowerPoint. And let's start out by talking about what a ratio is. A ratio is simply a relationship between two numbers. And it can be written, a ratio can be written in a number of different ways. For example, it can be written as a fraction. So in this case, I have a ratio of 3 to 4. So I can write that as either 3 over 4. I can write it as 3 to 4 with 2. I can use a colon in between the two numbers. Or, because again it's the same as a fraction, 3/4, I can write it as 3 divided by 4. So those are the different ways that we can write a ratio. Let's look at a quick example of that. What is the ratio of the height to the length of this rectangle? Well, we see that the height is 3 and the length is 5, so that would be a ratio of 3 to 5. And again, we could write that like that, as 3 to 5, or we could write it as 3 to 5 that way, or 3 to 5 that way, or even 3 to 5 in that way. Okay, so that's what a ratio is. It's simply a relationship between two numbers. A proportion is simply a relationship between two ratios. So specifically, a proportion is a statement that two ratios are equal. Here's an example of that. 7 is to 10 as 14 is to 20. So let's look at the different ways we can write out a ratio. First of all, we can write it using that colon notation. So we have 7 is to 10, there's our first ratio there, as 14 is to 20, and there's our second ratio there. And you'll notice that we use a double set of colons to represent as. Okay? And really what that means is equal. So another way of writing this, a more mathematical way, 7 to 10 we know we can write as a fraction, 7 over 10, is the same as 14 over 20. So in other words, another way to write that proportion is 7 over 10 is equal to 14 over 20. And we can see that this proportion is correct because on the left-hand side we have 7 over 10. On the right-hand side we know we can rewrite 14 as 7 times 2, and we can rewrite 20 as 10 times 2, and the 2's therefore would cancel out, and we get 7 over 10 is equal to 7 over 10. Okay, so that's what a proportion is. Simply two ratios that are equal. Let's look at some vocabulary that is used when we talk about proportions, and that is means and extremes. The outside terms of a proportion are called extremes, and the inside terms are called means. So think of mean as middle. Okay, so in other words, these two terms are the means, and these two numbers are the extremes. One of the things that's true when we have a proportion is that the product of the means is equal to the product of the extremes. And let's see why that is. This isn't anything really new, it's just an application of cross-multiplying. So looking at this proportion, we have 7 over 10 is equal to 14 over 20. So in other words, 7 is to 10 as 14 is to 20. And you'll notice that I can simply cross-multiply here. So 7 times 20 has to be equal to 10 times 14. And of course we know that already from our study of fractions. You can always cross-multiply like that. You'll notice what we've done is we've taken 7 times 20 and set that equal to 10 times 14. So the fact that the product of the means is equal to the product of the extremes, it's really just cross-multiplication. And we can see that that's true in this case. 140 is equal to 140. And oftentimes when we're solving problems with proportions, we'll use that trick of cross-multiplying. So let's look at a couple examples of solving problems with proportions. just like in general with algebra, usually we use x to represent the unknown quantity. And in this example, we have x is to 80 as 10 is to 400. And so the first thing we want to do is just put that into our mathematical language. We know that we could write that with that colon notation as x is to 80 as 10 is to 400. But more useful for us is to put it in terms of fractions. So x over 80 is equal to 10 over 400. And then to solve this for x, we're just going to cross multiply. Now in this case, we're not going to do both sides because we want to just isolate x. So we'll bring the 80 up here and multiply it. And so we get x is equal to 10 times 80 divided by 400. So that's 800 divided by 400. And that means x is equal to 2. And so that would be our answer. Let's take a look at another example of solving problems with proportions. And in this case, we have 4 is to 1/8 as 1/2 is to x. Let me first write that with our colon notation. So 4 is to 1/8 as 1/2 is to x. And now let me write it in terms of fractions. So we have 4 divided by 1/8, and that has to equal 1/2 divided by x. And this is kind of a nice fraction review because we've got to remember how to multiply fractions. So what we're going to do here is we're going to cross multiply. So again, I'm going to bring the x up to the top here, and I'm going to bring the 1/8 over here. So I have 4 times x is equal to 1/2 times 1/8. And we know how to multiply fractions. We simply multiply the tops, or numerators, and multiply the denominators. So I get 4x is equal to 1 over 16. And now I need to divide both sides of the equation by 4 because I want to isolate just x there, so that I get 4x divided by 4 is equal to 1 over 16 times 4. So in other words, the 4 goes on the bottom on both sides. And of course, on the left-hand side, the 4's cancel out, and I'm just left with x. And on the right-hand side, I get 1 over 64. And so that's the answer to this problem, that x is 1 over 64, or 1/64.